You probably think of argument as, something you do when you disagree. Maybe it even gets a bit heated sometimes. But what if we told you it's actually one of the most fundamental, fascinating, maybe even beautiful ways we make sense of the world?
It really is. And today we're doing a deep dive into this surprisingly rich world of argument. We're pulling from a text called Argument in Composition.
Okay.
And our mission really is to show you how learning about argument can be a shortcut to being well informed, helping you spot key insights, maybe those aha moments in how information is shaped around you.
Yeah, seeing the structure underneath.
Exactly. We want to unpack why argument matters so much, way beyond the classroom. We'll look at its history, some of the challenges, and its really profound impact on how we think, communicate, even how we understand ourselves.
Okay, let's get into it. So, starting with education. Argument's role has changed quite a bit, hasn't it? It wasn't always front and center in writing classes.
That's absolutely spot on. For a long time, argument wasn't really treated as its own thing in writing curricula. Even back in the 80s, the source mentions that while the argument textbooks themselves were actually pretty high quality, they were often taught, in isolation, kind of
Hmm.
separate from everything else.
Huh. That seems odd now, given how central it feels. So, what was the focus then? And why do you think argument got pushed aside?
Well, the text points out that for decades, writing courses were really dominated by what they call traditional or maybe modes-based curricula.
No space, you mean like,
Yeah, I think narration, description, process analysis essays, that sort of thing. The focus was more on these like categories of writing rather than the core skill of actually building a strong argument.
okay.
And part of the problem the text suggests was just that teaching argument well, it's hard. It's complex.
Ah, and that complexity, that difficulty, that's what led to this rumlot problem the source talks about.
Exactly that. Because argument is tricky, teachers often struggle to really convey its sophistication. And this sometimes meant boiling it down to very basic assignments, like that classic example the source gives, explaining how to make a peanut butter sandwich.
Oh, I definitely remember doing assignments like that. They were
Yeah.
fine.
Ah.
But yeah, looking back, probably not the best way to learn about, actual argumentation.
Right. It kind of shows how maybe the approach was a bit superficial back then. The source notes many writing teachers felt, frankly, ill prepared or just weren't sure how to make argument accessible and engaging. So there was this reluctance to really lean into it.
But that started to change. There was a shift.
A pretty significant shift, yeah. There's this growing recognition now of just how sophisticated and useful argument is, and that's led to new ways of teaching it. We're seeing more of a move towards things like problem-based learning, or what the source calls an ascend-down presentational mode.
Okay, unpack that a bit. Ascend down.
Think of it like this. Instead of the teacher just delivering information, they guide students to sort of uncover problems themselves. Students debate solutions, they research, they synthesize, and then they present their own arguments, their own conclusions. It's much more active.
So, learning by discovery, not just receiving information.
Precisely, it's an inductive approach. The focus shifts from just knowing what an argument is to really understanding why it matters, how it works in the real world.
That sounds much more powerful. And speaking of the real world, to really drive home why argument matters, the source dives into this really fascinating uh, clash of viewpoints. This is where it gets interesting, right?
Yeah, this is a great example. The text explores this debate between two really prominent thinkers, John Leo and Stanley Fish. And it centers specifically around their different takes on the aftermath of 9/11 and this idea of moral relativism.
Okay, let's break that down. Start with John Leo. What was his position, especially regarding moral relativism? And maybe quickly, what is moral relativism for anyone unfamiliar?
Sure, so moral relativism is basically the idea that moral judgments are true or false only relative to some particular standpoint, like a culture or a historical period, and that no standpoint is uniquely privileged over all others. John Leo strongly argued against this. His core stance was that universal moral standards absolutely exist.
Universal standards.
And
Okay.
he believed that ignoring these standards makes you, in his words, blind to evil. For him, the 9/11 attacks were a stark example. He saw it as an undeniable absolute evil. 6,000 children orphaned, 6,000 murders, as he put it, something that just couldn't be relativized or explained away by saying, oh, it's just a different cultural viewpoint.
Right, he saw it as an objective wrong. And did his view connect to other things beyond 9/11?
Oh, definitely. He saw a connection to broader societal trends. He viewed, for example, multiculturalism sometimes as a way to kind of dodge discussions about moral content. He also argued that certain labels, like racist, sexist, homophobic, were sometimes used, in his view, to just shut down moral debate altogether. He was searching for objective truth, a clear right and wrong.
Okay, so a very clear stance on objective morality. Now, contrast that with Stanley Fish. He represents a postmodern relativist perspective, right? How does that differ?
Fundamentally different. For Fish, coming from that postmodern relativist angle, what we call truth isn't some fixed, objective thing out there waiting to be discovered. Instead, he argues it's always shaped by our interpretation, by language, by the context we're in. There's no absolute objective standard independent of us. It's always about interpretation.
Wow, okay. So if there's no objective standard, how does someone like Fish interpret an event like 9/11, which Leo saw as clearly evil?
Well, Fish wouldn't frame it as an absolute evil in Leo's sense. He viewed it more as a rhetorical event.
Rhetorical event, meaning
Meaning it's something subject to various interpretations, various ways of being framed and understood through language. He really emphasizes how rhetoric, how language shapes our reality. For Fish, the goal of argument isn't necessarily to find the absolute truth. It's more about inducing cooperation among people by understanding how persuasion works. Truth, for him, is relative to us, to a specific community, a specific context.
that really throws the contrast into sharp relief, doesn't it? Leo searching for universal objective truths, and Fish seeing truth as constructed, as context dependent.
Exactly. And you can see how these bedrock philosophical differences lead to completely different ways of understanding major events, morality, even basic human nature. It's a fundamental tension.
So, bringing this back to our listeners, what's the takeaway from this Leo versus Fish deep dive? Why does understanding this difference matter for us?
Well, it shows that understanding argument isn't just about picking a side in a debate. It's about recognizing the underlying beliefs, the frameworks that shape different viewpoints you encounter. The source actually suggests that Fish's approach, when applied to teaching, helps students move beyond simple duality, just thinking in terms of right versus wrong,
Okay, move beyond duality towards...
towards what the source calls commitment, which means really understanding and engaging with multiple complex perspectives, even if you don't ultimately agree with them all. So for you, when you hear a strong opinion, instead of just reacting, you can ask, okay, what are the fundamental assumptions here? What's their underlying view of truth or morality? It's a tool for much deeper critical thinking.
That's really useful. It shifts the focus from just the surface argument to the foundations beneath it.
Yeah.
An argument isn't just confined to these intellectual debates or classrooms, right? The source connects it to some pretty surprising areas, like this idea of purifying war.
Yeah, that's a fascinating connection drawn from Kenneth Burke. He talks about ad bellum purificandum in his Grammar of Motives.
Which means the purification of war. Sounds intense.
It does, but it's not about literal combat. Burke's idea, as interpreted here, is that argument can be a way to channel and transform aggression. It's about moving away from a purely win-lose adversarial mindset, just trying to defeat an opponent towards something more constructive, like finding common ground or working towards shared goals, even amidst disagreement.
So transforming conflict through communication.
Exactly. The source uses analogies like courtship or even political campaigns. Real persuasion, in this view, isn't just about winning, it's about inducing cooperation, bringing people towards a shared understanding, even if it starts from a place of conflict. It's about making the conflict productive, in a sense.
Okay, that makes sense. Channeling conflict,
Hmm.
which leads nicely into the next connection. Argument and critical literacy. What do we mean by critical literacy here? It's more than just reading, right?
Oh, much more. Critical literacy isn't just about decoding words or absorbing information passively. It's about actively questioning the underlying assumptions in what you read or hear. It's recognizing that knowledge isn't just neutral fact. It's always shaped, constructed, and conveyed through particular perspectives. It's about, as the source puts it, knowing your knowledge.
Knowing your knowledge. I like that. So it's like looking behind the curtain.
Kind of, yeah. It means challenging assumptions, actively considering different viewpoints, and understanding that even things presented as simple facts can be influenced by who's presenting them and why. It's like not just eating the meal, but asking about the recipe and the chef's intentions.
Great analogy. So it encourages active engagement.
Definitely. The source links this to the Brazilian philosopher Paulo Freire and his idea of problematizing. Again, Freire saw learning not as banking information, but as a process of discovery, of asking questions, of challenging the status quo. It empowers you, the learner, to think independently and critically engage with the world.
So when you encounter information, you don't just take it at face value. You ask, whose voice is this? Whose isn't? What's being assumed here?
Exactly. That's critical literacy in action.
Okay, and then the source takes another turn, linking argument to something really personal.
Mm.
Our identity. How does that connection work?
This is fascinating. It's not just that your identity influences the arguments you make, which seems obvious, right? But it's also that the arguments you make, the positions you take and defend, actually shape and reinforce who you are. It's a two-way street.
So arguing isn't just expressing who I am, it's also forming who I am.
Pretty much. It goes deeper than just, your stated beliefs. The source points out how your values, your background, even things like your consumer choices. They mention the example of supporting Apple versus IBM back in the day. How these things reflect deeper parts of your identity and inevitably inform the arguments you find persuasive or choose to make. So looking at argument this way offers this really powerful lens for self-understanding. It shows how your habits of mind, your core beliefs, kind of play out in your interactions. Think about it. That heated discussion about a political issue, or even your favorite sports team. You're not just defending a point, you're often defending a piece of your identity.
That adds a whole other layer to understanding disagreements. It's not always just about the facts. And building on that depth, the source makes what feels like a really crucial point. Argument is fundamentally ethical.
Yes, this is a profound takeaway. It argues that argument isn't just a logical exercise or a rhetorical game. It's deeply tied to ethics. Every choice we make in an argument, what we argue for, how we argue, the evidence we use or ignore, carries ethical weight. It reflects our moral stance, what we value, what we consider good or bad.
So you can't separate the argument from the ethics behind it.
You really can't. The source even uses Ursula Le Guin's short story, The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas, as an illustration.
Oh, the Omelas story.
Yeah, right. That story presents this utopian city whose happiness depends entirely on the perpetual suffering of one hidden child. It forces this stark ethical choice. And that kind of underlying ethical dilemma, the source suggests, mirrors the choices embedded in many complex arguments we see in the real world, whether in politics, business, or personal life.
That's powerful. It means we need to look beyond the surface logic. In this, flood of information we're all navigating, understanding this ethical dimension helps us ask not just what is being argued.
Right, but why it's being argued, what values are being pushed forward, what ethical choices are being made, maybe implicitly. It empowers you, the listener, the reader, to make more informed choices. Choices about which arguments you accept, which you challenge, and importantly, which ones you choose to make yourself.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here. We went from the historical struggles of teaching argument.
Yeah, the peanut butter sandwich days.
Right, to seeing how argument shapes our understanding of major world events through examples like Leo and Fish.
And then its role in maybe transforming conflict, not just winning fights, plus critical literacy, and even shaping our own identities.
And finally, landing on this idea of argument as a fundamentally ethical act.
It's been quite a journey through the concept.
It really has. So let's leave our listeners with a final thought. If argument really is this vehicle for ethical reasoning, for uncovering hidden assumptions, and for actively shaping our shared reality, well, how does that change things for you? How might it change the way you listen to the next debate or how you approach the next difficult conversation in your own life? What choices will you make about the arguments you amplify? And maybe most importantly, how will you ensure your own arguments contribute to the kind of world you actually want to see?